Welcome everyone to GIA's Knowledge Session, a series of talks and seminars about gemology fueled by our decades of research. At GIA, we consider ourselves so fortunate to study and learn from gems, and it's our mission to share our discoveries and learnings about the world. I'm excited to kick things off today. I'm Nathan Renfro, the manager of Color Stones here at GIA, and I'm joined by Dr. Aaron Palke, Senior Manager of Research, Vertriest, Supervisor of Field Gemology, and Robert Weldon, the Director of GIA's Laboratory. They're going to take you on a behind-the-scenes tour of some of their field gemology expeditions. Before we get started, there's just a little bit of housekeeping. Everyone attending this is automatically muted. If you have a question, please submit it using the Q&A feature you'll see at the bottom of the screen there. Feel free to ask questions as we go, and there will be a Q&A session at the end where Aaron, Wim, and Robert will have the opportunity to answer some of your questions. We'll also send a recording of the session to you later today, and that message will also have a survey, so we'd love to hear your feedback. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Aaron.
So thanks everybody for joining. We started this series of webinars, the behind the scenes of field gemology webinars, for one reason, and that's to utilize the most underutilized resource that we have from field gemology, and that's all of the stories and photos that we take, which unfortunately never make it into the publications that we put out in our quarterly journal, Gems in Gemology. Now, being out in the field can be an overwhelming experience. There's a lot of things that you have to see and do, and there's a lot of people that you meet and cultures to learn about and mines to document and stones to see. However, when we make our publications, we often have to condense this variety of experiences into a shorter, more manageable publication. And so that means that a lot of the stuff we get out in the field never gets used and it gets thrown to the wayside. Now, the thing is, Wim, Robert, and I, we're very sentimental people. We don't like throwing away our photos. So we developed this webinar series to share all those photos and those stories with you. And we hope you guys will have as much fun listening to our stories and seeing our photos as we do sharing them with you. So here's how it's going to work. We'll share a photograph on the screen. The person who took the photo will describe the photo and give a little bit of info about the story behind the photograph. The presentation is divided into sections where all of the photos in a certain section fall under some certain theme. And then we'll talk about the photos that come up and share our stories. So with that, we want to start off before sharing photos of the field with a little bit of background about ourselves, who we are, where we came from, and why we are field gemologists. And I'm going to start here. This is the least aesthetically pleasing slide that we're going to have in the whole presentation. Basically, the story here is that I started off as a PhD student studying geology, studying mineralogy. I really wasn't a gemologist at this point in time. I used this technique called magic angle spinning nuclear magnetic resonance, which I don't think you guys need to know about. Basically, I just know that I spent my time mostly looking at squiggly lines on a screen and playing with a superconducting magnet. I recently went back and looked at some of the publications that I put out from that time, and a couple titles are shown there on the left. And I was a little bit shocked because it's just so dramatically different from what I'm doing now. You can look at these titles and I don't expect you to read them or understand them or even care about them. But basically I want to say the point of all this is that what field gemology has been great for me. It's helped me evolve a lot as a scientist. So it took me from the lab, from doing technical, esoteric work that most of the world didn't care about, to still being a scientist, but being able to come and be more of an observer of the human condition and going out in the world and seeing what's going on. And so really it's having these new experiences out in the field and learning to interact with people more and interact with the human element has, I think, really made me a better scientist. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from with field gemology. And I think that's why it's so important to me.
This is Robert Weldon. I'm the director of the GIA library. You're probably wondering what a librarian is doing in the middle of field gemology, but I arrived at this whole thing slightly differently. In my previous impersonation, I was a senior writer and editor at JCK magazine at Professional Jeweler, and also a gemologist. So my perspective has always been about gemstones, but of course, also the people who handle them all the way through the supply chain. Those things have been interesting to me. And so as you look at this picture, I'd like you to draw the correlation between these incredible gems that we have in our trade, like this magnificent emerald, which is actually part of the museum collection at GIA, and the people who do the really difficult, dirty, and hard work, like this gentleman that you see on the left. His name is Rodrigo Rojas, and he's in Chivor, Colombia, mining pretty much the emerald that you would see on the right.
Hi, this is Wim Vertriest. I'm supervisor of field gemology. I don't have a rich and long backstory as my two co-hosts, so I just want to share a more recent story. Actually, this was a photo I took this morning that just shows for me what field gemology is all about, and it is going to the places, as I've been taught by previous field gemologists, to just go check out the places for yourself. Like, this is a photo I've taken in Channaburi, where I am right now, a city in eastern Thailand, and still an important trade and treatment center. But it used to be a mining center, but a lot of people don't believe that there's still mining going on. They think all the mining finished decades ago, which is partially true, but you can still find some mines. And I think this photo shows that very clearly. This is not a small mining operation. There's 3 big excavators, some heavy equipment, but I love it that you can see all the fruit plantations in the background. And then in the background, right in front of the big mountain, you can see the actual city of Channaburi, proving that I'm not just somewhere out there. This is really Channaburi. And this is a picture that I took this morning. So it's not as rich of a history, but it shows you what field gemology is all about. It shows you that it's really important to go visit the places if you really want to know what's going on. You can't rely on other people's judgment. By going there yourself, you can witness the situation on the ground and verify that. So that's what GIA Field Gemology tries to do, to go verify these things and then communicate and document all of that and communicate it to you, to the public, to everyone who wants to hear about it.
Thanks, Wim. And so for the next section, we're going to do a story about working in the field. Now, it's obviously a much different situation than being in the lab where I am right now. In the lab, you have an unknown stone. We have all these spectrometers around. We have laser beams we can shoot at the stone. You can do gemological techniques. You can do an RI or an SG reading. You can look at the stone in a microscope. There's a lot you can do in the lab. It's a very comfortable, cozy place to be to study gemstones. But when you're in the field, obviously, you have much more limited options. You have very simple techniques you can use. You have very simple tools because you're hundreds of miles away from any major city usually. You're hundreds of miles away from any lab. So what do? Here's the scenario. You're out in the field at an artisanal mining operation, looking at some pits some guys dug in the ground for gemstones, looking at the recovery, processing methods, talking to the miners, seeing what's going on. And then somebody comes up and very proudly hands you his day's work. He hands you a pile of stones. What do? So some of the most simple techniques and simple tools we bring out in the field are simply tweezers and a loop. So tweezers, you can pick up the stone, you can manipulate it, turn it around and see what it looks like. And a loop, I would make the case that a loop is probably the most important tool that you can have out in the field in order to get a better glimpse at the stone, to understand its morphology, to look at its color, to look a little bit inside of the stone sometimes. You know, if somebody hands you a stone and you need to figure out what it is, whether or not you want to try to acquire that sample and bring it back to the lab, you need to get some basic information. Is it a spinel? Is it a ruby? A lot of this stuff you can tell by just looking at the stone with a loop. Hopefully you brought your torch along. A high-powered torch is also a very wonderful tool to have in the field. So especially for research samples, I guess it's true for gemstones as well. But if you want to know what's inside of this stone, oftentimes with a rough stone, you can't see what's going on underneath the surface very well. But if you want to bring that stone back for spectroscopy analysis or to polish into a wafer for inclusions, a torch can get you a little bit of an inside look inside the stone. You can highlight fractures and you can see potential inclusions inside the stone using a high-powered torch.
I think another piece of equipment that is a little bit more advanced is what we call a dark field loop. I think people who are familiar with working with microscopes know that there's different modes of lighting that you can use. You can use bright field, you can use indirect light, overhead light, but dark field lighting conditions are very handy because they make the inclusions in a stone, especially crystal inclusions, stand out against the background. So you have a modified instrument that you can use on screw on your torch. And you can basically look through the loop and you're looking in dark field conditions, which is very handy to inspect, especially faceted stones. It's not as useful for for rough stones. But here there's Aaron looking at a parcel of, I think this was Iranian demantoid, just to check the inclusions, like a quick check. We're looking at demantoids. Are there horsetails in there? Are there other crystals in there? To just get a good idea of the clarity of the stones when using this tool, which is very comparable to a microscope. Just the magnification is not that high.
All right, thanks, Wim. Now for his next story, which is the art of the deal, buying and selling gemstones in the field and some of the unusual ways that people buy and sell stones.
As field gemologists, we go all over the world, and all over the world, of course, customs are different, stones that are being sold are different. So you see some unique situations of people selling, presenting, and buying gemstones. From techniques that not everyone might be familiar with. Those that are more familiar with what's happening in the trade and or have bought rough or visited these source countries might have seen this situation before, but I still want to highlight this a little bit. So this is a photo I took in Sri Lanka a few years back in a place called Nivitigala. Nivitigala is close to the gemstone mines, but it is mainly famous for its morning market, where they trade a particular variety of sapphire, namely the Geuda material. So that is material that has very fine rutile particles in there and is very good for heat treatment. So those are often slightly milky, cloudy stones, often white, but they, upon heat treatment, they turn bright blue and completely transparent. But it is very important to judge the quality of that silk, the quality of these inclusions when looking at those stones. And to do that, the buyers immerse the stones, but they also try to block out all visible light. So they want to work in a completely dark environment. So foreign buyers come there with their rental cars, and they put all these covers on the windows to create a completely black light. So they have completely control over the light from their torch to see where those particles are located in the stones, whether they're zoned, how dense they are, to get a better understanding of the stone and how it will react to potential treatment. So it's very, very unusual when you walk into this market that you see all these cars lined up where buyers are just handing stones through the front window, but all the rest of the windows are completely covered. So you hand stones and then the window goes up again, everything gets covered. The buyer looks at the stone and then hands you the stone back if he doesn't want it. So that's an unusual sight, but we see unusual sights all over the world. And I think the next picture shows us a scene that we saw in Myanmar.
When I just noticed, is that Claudia in the background of that photo?
Correct, yeah, that was during one of the gem shows in Sri Lanka that we took a few days after that to actually go check out some of the mining areas. So we were already in country with the lab to visit that show, and with some education representatives. So we took our chances to go see the mines and go out there. I think this photo I took, I believe last year, about a year ago, December 2019, on the market in Mogok. What we see here is a gentleman who speaks Mandarin using the WeChat platform. So WeChat's been in the news a couple of months ago, but it's a very popular mobile application in China where it's a platform that serves everything. It's communication, it's social media, but it's also banking. It's a sales platform, an auction platform. So this guy, he's actually holding a live auction from the Mogok market on this platform where people are buying directly in platform. So he has a line of potential sellers up there. And they present him the stone. He presents the stone, does a live sales pitch for it. You can see that he has this box of stones there, but he also has the ideal lighting conditions. He even has a lighter back there, which he uses to show color change. He has a plate of snacks nearby. So it's a very nice situation for him to just present stones to potential buyers over the internet. People are on the other side of this platform on their mobile phone, but they can wrap up the entire transaction through that WeChat platform. Like the stone is shown, presented, auctioned, and paid for in less than 5 minutes. And then they just note it down and they ship it later. But the whole transaction is very smooth. And we've seen similar setups even during the last Tucson show. We've seen it in the Bangkok show. So this kind of online sales is happening more and more and more. And I think this is another picture just to show how out of hand a cup of tea can get. So while we were in Mogok, we were in a valley to the north of Mogok called the Bernard Valley. We met this gentleman and he wanted to show us some peridot crystals. So he invited us over for a cup of tea. So we're all seated in his front yard. But while that happened, the neighbors saw that we were there and they wanted to show off some stones as well. And within 5 minutes, the whole table was covered with just the widest variety of gemstones. There's tons of fancy sapphires, both cut and uncut. We've seen peridot, quartz crystals. So people kept bringing and kept piling on material. So it just shows like the way that it's presented there, everyone's involved with stones. So everyone has something to show you. And it quickly turns into one big gemological party when you're out in Mogok, and even stop for a random cup of tea because somebody wants to show you something.
Thanks, Wim. With that, we'll move into our next set of stories, old and new.
Yeah, old and new. It's something that I noticed for the first time when we were visiting Yekaterinburg in Russia. So Yekaterinburg in Russia is a city. It's also called the gateway to Siberia, but it is also the deepest heartland of the former Soviet Union. Like in the former Soviet Union, you couldn't be more central as Yekaterinburg. And that is both physically, but also ideologically. So you see a lot of this traditional values, traditional buildings, but they're side by side with a lot of modern buildings, a lot of modern ideas that are coming up. So this picture of like the traditional wooden house, that is a very romantic house, right next to one of the biggest skyscrapers in Russia outside of St. Petersburg and Moscow. I think this is like a 52 floors, just shows you this immense contrast in this country that is very much in touch with its traditional values, but also embracing all these new modern ideas. And I think the next photo shows it in a little bit more subtle way. This is a statue of a gentleman called Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin is was one of the first communist leaders of Russia. So he led the revolution, and he was very much in favor of communism overthrowing capitalism, that capitalism should be abandoned and communism should be installed. He was very adamant about his beliefs. But the fact that right now there is a statue of Vladimir Lenin, who was opposed to all things capitalism and consumerism, and on the Vladimir Lenin square, right in front of his statue, there is now the Europa shopping mall, one of the biggest shopping malls in Russia. So I found that quite striking, that you've got one of the founders of Russian communism, capitalist concepts of shopping malls. So that's one of the more subtle ways where you see this contrast between the classic belief, like but also the embracing the new modern concepts that are coming there.
This next story, the next part of this story is in line with what Wim was just talking about. So what I noticed when I was in Yekaterinburg, when we went to the Demantoid and Emerald mines, was a lot of these old paintings and murals all on the buildings and everything around the city. And a lot of these paintings had this Soviet style, this Soviet theme to them. And I found it really interesting. So this is a photo of a mural on, I think it was a newsstand, the door which was closed. And it's a World War II Soviet soldier. And obviously, if you know the Russians, it's very deep in their heart, the events of World War II, because a lot of their soldiers basically suffered more than most any other country in the world. And what was interesting about this, though, was the contrast with some of the other murals you might see around the city, which this is another big mural, which was like a block down the street from the first one. And it's showing the last Russian Empress Alexandra the Tsarina, who with her family was brutally executed in the city of Yekaterinburg. And so it was very interesting, this contrast between these two views. And the Russians hold both of these histories very close in their hearts. The old imperial lineage and the old imperial history and the Soviet times as well. And that's shown, I think, actually really well in this photo, which is showing in the main part of the photo, the church on all, and translated to English is the church on all blood in honor of all saints resplendent in the Russian land. And basically this is a church that was built on the site where the Romanov family, the last imperial family of Russia, was brutally executed. And so they built this church kind of in honor of those old imperial times and the Russian imperial families. And then right across the street from that, though, is this statue with these two Soviet laborers. So this is like in honor of the Soviet theme of work and labor. And they're kind of proudly, almost defiantly facing toward this church. And so I just thought it was really interesting how the Russians kind of value and honor both these almost diametrically opposed lines of history, the Soviet times and the Imperial Russian history, and how they can keep both those things in their heart, and sort of they're moved by both of those diametrically opposed histories. And that's sort of what I wanted to capture with that photo. And with that, we're going to turn it back over to Robert Weldon to take us into South America.
Okay, so just proceeding on with that theme of then and now, we have to the left there a picture of what later became known as Diamantina in the state of Minas Gerais in Brazil. It was originally the small town of Tijuco that was Areal de Tijuco, that was basically founded there by the Bandeirantes, who were making incursions into Brazil. And it was in the early 1700s that they discovered diamonds there in the river, in the Jequitinhonha River that flows by it. And so the town was renamed Diamantina. I just thought this was a very interesting perspective, because I think as field gemologists, having that luxury of being able to understand history and time, it really adds a perspective and a depth to what we do. So here is Diamantina at the turn of the century in the early 1900s, and Diamantina as it looks like today. You can still see the steeples of that church there that indicate it's the same place. In this picture here, you'll see that diamonds were, so they were discovered in Minas Gerais, but they were also discovered in the northern state of Bahia in Brazil. Now, these diamonds were recovered from potholes, and you can see those potholes here in the conglomerates. The gems were basically deposited as they flowed down the river and tumbled into these potholes. And in the background, you can see the legendary town of Lençóis, which is in the literature as one of the sources for diamonds in Brazil. And in fact, the diamonds in Brazil, it was the largest purveyor of diamonds in the world until diamonds were discovered in the 1850s in South Africa. But everyone always thinks of Brazil as the colored gemstone locality, and of course it is, we know that. But very few people think of Brazil as a diamond purveyor, and yet it remains a diamond supplier today. So here's a close-up picture of those potholes, and you can see the picture on the left. There was a theory that as the diamonds tumbled down the river, they would flow into a section of a depression there, and then would be swirled around in a circular fashion through the flow of the water, and that diamonds themselves would form those circles in the rock. I think that's far-fetched, in my opinion, and I think most geologists today think so as well. But I tried to capture the picture of that circular motion of the water in a time frame, so you can sort of see that on the picture on the left. On the right, you just see this wonderfully water-washed surface of the conglomerate. And this is what a diamond in conglomerate looks like. So you can just imagine the erosionary forces loosening this diamond from its host, and then it tumbling down the river and being deposited in one of those potholes. At the time they discovered those, there were plenty of diamonds in those little potholes, but over time, obviously, those have all disappeared. And I think every once in a while, some people are still looking for them, and they will find them here and there. So not far from the Chapada Diamantina is this region right here, which is, what is the name of this place? It's in Bahia. It's called Remedios. It actually translates to medicine. So this is the small town of Remedios, or Medicines, in the state of Bahia. It was called Medicines because it had flowing water in the area, and the Bandeirantes, who were the conquerors of olden age, would always stop here to sort of recoup and recover from their ordeals going into the incursions into the land. So the picture of the miner that you see here holding a piece of rutilated quartz, and then a really spectacular piece here on the right, which is actually owned by one of the owners of the mine here. His name is Mr. Brian Cook. It's an incredible piece of rutilated quartz. Brian Cook is from Nature's Geometry, and in fact, he's developing his mine to be a model for sustainable mining and business practices. And so this image was also taken in that town of Remedios, and I just love it. You know, Brazilians often hang out of their windows and say hello to people as they're passing by, and this family of young girls was sitting there. And if you look into the center of the picture, I think you'll see immediately who the boss is. If you have trouble locating her, there she is right in the middle. But anyway, it's Brian Cook's program, which aims to teach locals fundamentals of mining, the fundamentals of sustainable farming and business practices that will lead to a livelihood for a family like these young ladies for the future when the gemstones run out.
Thanks, Robert. So the next set of stories, we're going to talk about different mining techniques, different things we've seen out in the field when we've gone out to document these mining sites. And this is sort of in contrast to a lot of the photos we showed in the previous webinar, where we focus more on sort of the big machines that people use to mine gemstones. And I found that really interesting because I'm fascinated with those big machines. And I love how you have the big powerful machines in contrast to the, you know, the beautiful gemstones we're pulling out of the ground. But in this case, we're going to go into a little bit more artisanal mining situations where the mining is done more with manual labor. You might have some motorization or some kind of mechanization involved at a small scale in order to alleviate some of that manual labor. But for the most part, this is guys with strong backs digging in the dirt for hours on end, pulling gemstones out of the ground. And this was one situation in Mogok that we found particularly striking. These guys are digging underneath these boulders. And so what we see here is they've got these boulders supported by these big long poles, these big sticks and logs. And they're going in there pulling gem gravel out directly from underneath these boulders. And while this does look rather dangerous, this is actually not a bad strategy for getting gemstones, because you think about it, in Mogok, people have been digging for gemstones for centuries, if not thousands of years. And a lot of the gem gravels that are currently being worked may have also been worked at some point in the past, and they're just kind of reworking a lot of these deposits. So if you can get underneath one of these boulders, this is most likely to be virgin gem gravel. You know, probably nobody's ever touched the gem gravel that's sitting directly underneath that boulder. And so they'll go in, dig underneath these boulders, and pull out the gravel and the mud and pull that back out to some place where they have access to water, where they can do the washing and pull the gemstones out. So while this actually is quite dangerous and it seems rather unstable, you know, these guys are going out there to get these stones and taking the risk in order to, you know, provide for themselves and make money and provide for their communities as well. Here's another scene from Mogok, and this looks a little more stable. So what's going on in this photo, you have these two guys. You can see the guy on the ground, obviously right here. If you look down the hole, there's another guy there who has brought him some gem gravel. So what these guys are doing, they've dug this pit vertically into the ground. And basically the idea is that when you're looking for these gem gravels, they're often at sort of specific depths beneath the soil profile. And so what you do is you sink a vertical shaft into the ground. They've put all these boulders around the shaft in order to stabilize it. And then once you reach the gem gravel layer, you then spread out horizontally and follow that gem gravel bed for as far as you can, for as much as you can. And so this guy, I like the photo because you can see these two guys have the same matching hat on. This guy just brought a bag of gem gravel to the person on the surface, who is using a long bamboo pole to pull it up to the surface, and then it'll be later processed and washed. And on to Robert for the next photo.
Yeah, so we're jumping around the world here, but I think it's an interesting shot. You remember the first picture that I showed you of the miner in Colombia, Rodrigo Rojas? This is the mine that he was working earlier. So it's a little more sophisticated here. They've got a jackhammer. They've gone through the tunnel for 3 years. They've been tunneling and following a vein. And for 3 years and a lot of investment, they have found absolutely nothing. So, you know, That is the definition of many mines, basically holes in the ground through which you pour a lot of money. But I did want to show you some of the more sophisticated mines that we've seen. This is one of them. So basically the rock wall is occasionally blasted to cut through some of the carbonaceous shale, and then jackhammered when they think they've reached a point where there may be some gems. In the types of alluvial mining and near the Abaete River in Brazil, it involves sieving the ore that you take out of the rivers, and then basically sluicing them and overturning that sieve onto this platform you see here. And there's a gentleman basically combing through the heavier sediments that have settled there and looking for diamonds. And this is what that overturned sieve would look like. So the heavier elements are now on the top. And you can see most of these are garnets, like those that you have right there. And if you're lucky, occasionally you'll find a diamond. Actually shows those diamonds. And this is a month worth of work in the fashion that you've seen. And the other reason I wanted to show you this is that you saw where those gentlemen were working. This picture was taken in that environment. So the job of a field gemologist is also to document things in an artistic fashion, and also in a way that really shows what the production looks like. I wanted this to be a publication quality image for Gems in Gemology or some other publication. So I took great care of taking my entire studio, talking about tools of the trade, all the way down to Brazil, and then working in a very small, cramped space, like a small closet. I was able to produce this, which of course, is publication quality.
Yeah, so I want to show this picture. Like at first sight, it might be a bit confusing because of the perspective, but this is a picture that I took straight down. So this is a vertical mining shaft that goes down, very, very similar to the one that Aaron showed with the guys with the matching hats that were using the bamboo pole. But of course, you can see that this one is very, very deep. We estimated that this mine was at least 30 meters deep. So you either need a very long bamboo pole, or you need another way to get your gravel up. So you can see that there's air tubes going down, but that means that your miners go down, they try to collect the gem gravel, but the gem gravel also has to come up. And to do that, people use all kinds of homemade engineering DIY solutions. And I think the one that we've seen on our last trip in Myanmar is one of my personal favorite. So these guys were working on the top of the mine, so they were working at the surface. And you can see on the left that these guys have repurposed an old motorcycle. I think the next photo shows a bit of a close-up on that, but they've basically repurposed that motorcycle, hooked it up to a winch. So basically by just putting it in gear and opening the gas, moving forward, they can just crank that lever. They can hoist up those bags of gravel, which are like 30 kilos. They can hoist them up in a matter of seconds. So imagine if you'd have to carry every bag manually up those ladders. That would take you an enormous amount of time. But these guys have repurposed an old motorcycle to do that work for them. So I found that a very interesting, very cool DIY engineering tool for making your miner's life a lot easier.
Okay, so this is me. Actually, not the person in the picture. That's a guy called Fernando. He's at the Anahi Mine in southeastern Bolivia, along the border of Brazil. And this was an incredibly difficult picture to take because he's actually sitting inside of a giant geode, massive. All of the lines, all of the walls lined with ametrine and amethyst crystals. It's kind of hard to explain this picture, but I'd like to give you just a primer of what we have to go through just for some of the dramatic pictures like this one. I had Fernando actually hold my flash unit, and I took a very long time exposure. I asked him at one point to please trigger the flash, which he did. And so that illuminated him and the region that he was inside of. And then I asked the other miners that were with me on the trip to please use their flashlights to paint light along the walls to the left. So that illuminated the other crystals that you see there, giving us this entire picture. This was in the days before digital, so I didn't know whether I had achieved the photo, and I was able to get it. So this came out on film. Pretty cool.
Thanks, Robert. So with that, we'll move into our next section of stories, which is on faith and devotion.
Okay, so that trip to Bolivia, of course, was to really study ametrine and understand it. But I think we feel that we need a slightly larger, more holistic perspective when we go to some of the countries, really try to understand the culture. Now, the culture of Bolivia is such that everything really, all of the civilizations, even from ancient times, were settled up in the Andes Mountains. And then as you go down towards the eastern part of Bolivia, down from the Andes, you get into the lowlands. And of course, that's where the ametrine is. But this is called the Puerta del Sol, which means the gate of the sun, with the Inca god Inti that had been carved out of one giant piece of rock that you see right there. And it is Bolivia's national symbol. So we really wanted to understand, the Bolivian culture and everything else before we went into understanding more about the gemstone itself.
Like this is, again, we're traveling around the world at record speeds. This is a picture we took in Myanmar. Usually when we go to Myanmar, the focus is going to be on rubies and sapphires from the Mogok region, but of course you can't fly in there, so you have to travel there along the way. And one of the main hubs that we always stop in is in Mandalay. And Mandalay, apart from a big gemstone trading center, is of course it's a big town, a big city in Myanmar, former capital. But it's also the home to a lot of religious important places. And Dr. Chow Tu, who was guiding our trip and a good friend of ours, he told us, guys, if you really want to see something special, we'll have to wake up very early and we'll go to this ceremony in this temple. So we joined them. We were in the van by 4 a.m. We drove to this temple where every morning there's a ceremony where they wash the Buddha's face. So they have a massive statue of a Buddha and they revere it very deeply. I think it's a very important statue. According to the local tales, there's only been 5 images made of the likeness of the Buddha when he was alive, and this is one of them. The other 2 are in India and the 2 others are in paradise now. So this is a very important statue for Buddhist religious beliefs. And every morning there is an elaborate ceremony where the face of the Buddha is washed and his teeth are brushed. And so the head monk takes great care of washing, polishing the gold face, cleaning it. And people that attend that ceremony, they give towels to clean off the Buddha's face. And they receive those, and those towels that were used to clean off the Buddha's face are highly revered and are often kept in people's home shrines and are considered of great spiritual and religious value. So that was a very interesting moment for us, because even though we are not practicing Buddhists, we could feel that there was a very deep religious vibe in that whole place. And it was a very intense ceremony for us to attend. Very special occasion.
Yeah, in fact, I think understanding these cultural aspects is really important to understanding the history of a gemstone. So going back to Colombia here, where emeralds have been appreciated by the Muisca and the Muzo for hundreds of years before the Spaniards came in, you have this fabled mountain in that valley. It's called Furatena. And the legend, as the legend has it, when the mountain was cleaved, the god Are cried tears that then became the emeralds that supplied the region. So I thought that was a very interesting story. It is definitely an interesting mountain. Obviously, it has been revered since Inca times or the Muisca times. And then later, when the conquistadors brought Christianity with them, everything sort of changed. So here in the second picture, you have sort of the juxtaposition of the two, the ancient culture of the Furatena and the more modern conquistador culture of Christianity, which they brought with them at the same time that they were taking emeralds back to the old world. And so here is the Virgin Mary standing on a globe, very confidently overseeing the entire emerald region.
Thanks, Robert. So with that, we're going to move on to one of our next set of stories, which is the bigger picture. Taking a step back and kind of realizing your place in the world on a field gemology expedition. And I'll start this one off with a photo I took in Mogok. And I guess I'll preface this by saying, one of the things I've learned about field gemology is that one of the best things you can do on a field gemology expedition is to take good photos. If you're out there taking bad photos, you're missing a big opportunity to document and to gather information and preserve information. And so I had to really make an effort initially when I started in field gemology to start taking better photos. I kind of emulated what I saw other people doing, and I read up on it, and I tried new things. And one of the things I noticed, I was looking at some of Wim's photos, and what I noticed was Wim's photos had a better way of kind of making you feel like you were present in the scene that he took a shot of. And like, we could take one of my photos, one of his side to side of the same subject, and his just did a better job of getting you in the scene. And so I realized, this is actually because the lens on Wim's camera had a wider field of view on it than mine did. And so he could just get more of the picture in the scene. And so what I did was, I tried using a new technique to compensate for this. So this is a photo of Mogok, the city of Mogok, looking over the lake, looking at the city. It's not a bad photo in and of itself, but when I looked at it, I wasn't satisfied with it, right? It didn't make me feel the way I felt when I was up there on this vantage point overlooking the city. And so what I did was I started taking these panorama photos where I would hold the camera in the same position, in the same kind of setting, and just scan over the entire horizon. And then later I would come back, and in Photoshop, I could stitch them all together. And all of a sudden this photo, you feel much more like you're right there in the scene at the vantage point yourself, looking over the city. And so I found this was a really nice technique. I'm starting using it a lot now recently. It's a very good technique to get you immersed and immerse the viewer in the scene and make them feel like they're really there. And this is kind of one of the ways I've evolved as a photographer out in the field. And I still got a long way to go to get to Wim and Robert's level, but I think I've been making some progress.
Yeah, this is a picture that I took in Greenland. So it was actually a very rewarding experience because first of all, we had the opportunity to go to Greenland, which was magnificent as it was. But of course, if you strictly talk about the field gemology goals of that, it was to study the ruby deposit. So we arrived there, we spent the whole day looking at the ground. We didn't take time to take a step back and admire what was happening around us. So we spent the whole day looking at rocks, looking at rubies, poking through the ground, hammering rocks into the facility where we look at more rocks, all things about the earth. But in the evening, it gets dark pretty quickly. And we finally had the time to take a step back and turn our gaze to the sky. And of course, when you're in Greenland, you have the chance of witnessing one of nature's most spectacular shows, the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis. And we were treated to a fantastic spectacle that just completed the whole circle. After spending our whole day looking at gemstones in the ground, we could look up to the sky in the evening and see one of the most amazing spectacles. This was not in the description. This was not in the proposal that we made when we went to Greenland, but it just makes the entire circle, it makes everything come together where we see like the magnificent beauty of this place, which is reflected in its gemstones as well.
Here we have an aerial view of the Muzo mining area, and this picture has not been published, and I've always wondered why, because it's really rare to see a nice aerial view of the entire region. If you look to the bottom right, that's the Muzo mine itself. The little island that you see in the center is where Victor Carranza, the Emerald King, used to live. The little stream that flows by it is the Itoko River, which also has enormous cultural significance. And as you go off into the perspective of the image, it joins the Magdalena, which flows in a different direction past the Consorcio mine, the Lapita, and a few other really significant emerald mines, and the Furatena mountain that you heard about below just in the past. Here, the little village that you see in the front is not a village per se, it's where the miners actually live. And then if you look into the top of the picture, top left, there's a little white sort of glittery area. That's actually the town of Muzo itself. So it's quite a distance from the mine and up there nestled up in the mountains. but this is just such an incredible dramatic view of the entire emerald region around Muzo. And now we're going to go to Bolivia, back again to that country. I just was traveling along the Altiplano with the videographer. We were going to the Ametrine mine the very next day, and we caught this scene, this lonely little church in the Andes Mountains, and in the background is the Huayna Potosí. The Huayna Potosí is Bolivia's highest mountain at nearly 20,000 feet, or maybe a little bit above it. So it's enormously high. But what makes this picture special is it really tells the story. The snows from these mountains, the melt off from these snows, are the lifeblood of the entire country and all of the countries in the Andean region as they flow down towards the Amazon basin, essentially. So we wanted to catch a picture of that as well, to really understand the entirety of what was happening within the Bolivia scene. So here's that picture. And this is down at the Pantanal itself. Quite a spectacular and beautiful area. And this was at, by the way, you know that you're reaching the end of a presentation when you come across a sunset, but I have to tell you, this is not a sunset. This is actually a sunrise. This is the Pantanal. So it's a big lowland, swampy area right along the border with Brazil. And just a mile up the road is the Anahi Mine, which produces this very rare form of quartz. But as I was looking at the scene and admiring this incredible view and listening to the parrots in the trees and imagining the piranhas in the water below me, I was struck by the fact that this sunrise actually looked like the colors of the gemstones that were produced in that area, all the way from the purples through the yellows and goldens. And this is a fantastic ametrine from that mine. It was faceted by Dalen Hargrave. And this pretty much sums up everything that we do. We really want an entirety of a story when we have it. So we go into the cultural aspects, we go into historical aspects. We photograph the gems and we photograph the people who handle them. That's really, I think, our job as field gemologists. And so I think all of us right now would like to take this opportunity to thank you for attending this behind the scenes part 2. And with that, I think we'll conclude this talk.
Thank you.
We're more than happy to take some questions, guys.
All right, I have a few questions that have come in. So one of the questions for all three, when traveling around the world, have you encountered any security issues or dangerous situations while dealing with gems?
Yes, I mean, I think it's very important always to go. First of all, I think it's very important for anyone who wants to go to a mine to have full permissions from the mine owner. That's a given. You cannot go to a mine and expect them to welcome you with open arms if you don't have a rapport that's been established a long time in advance. I know that the three of us often go with people who really know the region. So when I traveled in Colombia, for example, the person that was my main contact actually brought in 4 other people. From each one of those other people were from the region that we were walking through. So if we ever encountered a problem of any sort, they would know other people that we could reach out to if we needed to. It's really important, I think, to, have we encountered security issues? I haven't personally, but I think sometimes we skate on the edge of that. There are situations that we can encounter out in the field, for sure. So you have to be very careful.
All right, thanks, Robert. Another question, and this might tie into this a little bit. So one of the participants asked, how are the trips arranged? Are they approved by foreign government or agency? How much planning does it take to organize a trip, and how do you decide how long the trip will last? So I think, Robert, you probably touched on that a little bit with the miners, but maybe you can expand on, or all of you can expand on how the trips are actually planned.
Yeah, I think this is very much a case-by-case thing. Of course, in some countries are easier to travel to than others. Some countries you need to take longer trips. Some countries, even the areas that you want to visit are different. Regulations are different in every country. Like in some countries, entire mining areas are off limits, so you need explicit permission from. We try to go with local people who know the local rules, who know the local culture, and who know the local regulations. So those are people that are critical to our expeditions. They usually stay out of the spotlight, but those are really important people that help us with arranging permits and things like that. To find these people is actually the most challenging. You need to find and build relationships with people that you can trust literally with your life in the field in case anything goes wrong. People that know the local customs, know the local culture to guide you through all these situations, to help you with all the permits, permissions, and planning of those trips.
Yeah, very true.
Right, great. Another question, sort of following up on the travel planning. What percentage of the miners would you say speak English, or do you have to use interpreters in many cases?
Well, in several cases, we work with our local contacts who can help us with translations. For example, I think none of us spoke any Russian, although Aaron speaks a little bit of Russian, but I don't think enough to have a full-blown conversation with the miners. But we went there with our local contact, with Alexei, and Alexei helped us with translating, communicating with the miners. And the same applies everywhere. When we go to Ethiopia, especially when we went up north in Tigray, people speak the local language. But one of the government representatives that was traveling with us, he spoke the local language and could help us translating. So that's part of that preparation of working with those local people as well. That helps you communicate with everyone you encounter. Because you're right, not everyone speaks English everywhere you go.
Yeah, that's very true. And just to add to that one little bit, it helps if you speak the language. So in my case, the reason I went to South America quite a bit is because I speak Spanish and some Portuguese. So it is an advantage because you do get a nuanced perception of what's going on if you understand what people are saying. So that helps as well. But, you know, having an interpreter there, having someone who can really give you can translate that nuanced information is also pretty critical. And I know in Burma we had that person, so.
Right, very good. Our next question is, this participant was quite complimentary of the photos that you guys have provided. And they also ask, have you considered taking a drone with you in the field to capture aerial views?
Oh, have we ever?
Yeah, we've taken drones on expeditions, but of course, if you want to fly a drone, there's a lot more permits involved because there's different regulations all over the place. There's licenses. Importing drones, so like bringing them into the country, is not actually always easy. But actually, in this presentation, I think the first photo I showed from that Thai mine was actually taken with my drone this morning. So we are using it. It is a new tool. We're starting to use it, but we find that it's a very powerful method of communication, and the photos and videos that we've taken with it are extremely powerful and extremely telling of the mining stories that we see.
Right, great. And then I think we have time for one more question here. This is to all three of you. Can you each tell us what your favorite place that you've been to is and why?
It's saving the hardest question for last.
Yeah, exactly. Who wants to go? Who's the brave person going to go first?
I could say, I guess I'll start it off. And initially I was thinking Yogo because the Montana sapphires are so close to my heart, but actually I think I have to say Mogok, and I suspect Wim and Robert may say the same thing. I mean, it's just I don't want to put words in your mouth, guys, but it's such a magical place, and it's got all this history, and I mean, it's so overwhelming being there, and it kind of blows your mind to be in this legendary place where all of the rubies of antiquity and sapphires and everything else have come from. It's such a unique place. Nothing else in the world can match it for the diversity and the wealth of gems that have come out of there.
Yeah, okay, I'll go second then. You know, Aaron, absolutely. I'd say it's, for me, it's either a runner-up with Colombia. I absolutely love going to Colombia. It is one of the most beautiful countries on the planet. And the emerald history and the emerald deposits are so interesting. And the people are absolutely wonderful. Everywhere we went, to that question about security earlier, I never felt insecure. I never felt like I was in any type of danger in Colombia. Again, we planned that out very well, but Colombia is just such a magnificent country, and the people are so wonderful. The gem has such an incredible history that for me, I think, it's a toss-up between going to Myanmar and going to Colombia. I love them both.
Yeah, thanks for checking all those guys and leaving me with 2 less options.
That's why I wanted to go second.
I'm definitely agreeing with Mogok, but if I have to choose another one, I think every place has its certain attraction and it's on different levels. But if I do have to choose one, I'd probably go for northern Tanzania. That was the first location I visited in Africa. Mm-hmm. And I think in the previous seminar, so part 1 of this that we did a few months ago, we discussed a little bit about what Africa means to us. I mean, Africa is more than a continent. Africa is a feeling, it's a way of life. And the moment I set foot on the ground in Africa, it's an incredible feeling because you feel that raw power, that the presence of nature. It truly is back to basics. And Africa, it's such a special, I don't know how to put it in words, but it's a special feeling almost when you go there and you see it in everywhere, the surroundings, the way you transport, the people you meet. So I think that whole feeling, and it's the first time I got that was in northern Tanzania. So that's why I'm always happy to go back there, because I'm always reminding of the first time I felt that feeling.
I'm going to have to follow up on that and say that I love Africa too, the continent, and Tanzania, through that small scale miners project that I've been involved in, has been a place that I've visited a few times. I love it. I love it also for the incredible uniqueness of the gemstones that are produced there. Again, it's the people, it's these incredibly massive landscapes, and to Wim's point, that I always feel a little sad when I leave the continent because almost instantly there's this yearning to go back. Africa does have that draw for you. And so that question was really tough, because the truth is, you could say any one of those places is one of your favorites for sure.
Right. All right. Well, I think just to piggyback on Aaron, since I haven't been to Burma, I'll say that Yogo was my favorite trip, despite the fact that Aaron and I got snowed in there for an extra day. But seeing all those Yogo sapphires, that was hard to beat for me. So I'll take care of the Yogo part, Aaron.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks very much for joining us. If you all have any questions, feel free to find us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And just a small announcement, recently we have started a Gems in Gemology Facebook page, so you can get a lot of gemological content and all the latest updates from GIA's quarterly publication, Gems in Gemology, on the Facebook page. And then for our knowledge session next week, please join us for a talk on melee diamond analysis by Dr. Mike Breedy. All right. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.